Chapter 1. Be Invisible. London, 1908. When the alarm shrilled in the attic room, for a moment, Alice thought she was back in the crowded Kentish cottage with her family and 5 younger siblings. With her cheeks flushed, she sprang out of bed, hopped across the cold floorboards, and threw open the faded curtains. A tiny streak of light from the moon peeked through the cloudy sky over the city rooftops. After lighting a candle, Alice tiptoed over to the mass of red curly hair in the twin bed next to her own.
Ethel!
Alice prodded the 13-year-old's arm.
It's 5:30.
Ethel buried her freckled face under her pillow and received further prodding.
5 minutes. Don't fall asleep again, whispered Alice.
Ethel groaned and lifted her head up to watch her new roommate pull her uniform from their shared chest of drawers.
Why are you so full of beans? Winter's horrible in this place. It's a fresh start, and I'm in London.
Alice put her uniform on the bed and turned around to pick up the jug on top of the chest of drawers. She tipped it into a heavily chipped basin, but nothing came out.
I'd rather be back home in Ireland.
Ethel got out of bed, wincing as her feet hit the cold floor.
The water's frozen again.
She stood next to Alice and picked up one of 2 crisp flannels.
So are these. We'll have to wash downstairs. Come on, hurry up.
The girls quickly threw on their stockings and print dresses.
What have they got you doing first?
Asked Ethel, tying a Hessian apron around her waist.
I'm going up to see to Nero,
said Alice, looking into a small mirror to pin her long blonde hair up.
That's rough on your first morning. Mabel hates him.
I know. Alice paused, thinking back to the conversation she had had with the first housemaid the evening before. When Mabel spoke of Nero, her face had twisted as if she had just been stung by a wasp.
He can't be that bad. Oh, I'm sure he's grand. I mean, the girl before you was in tears a few times.
Ethel noticed Alice's jaw drop.
But, anyway, let's hurry up. Mrs. Dell will be wanting her cup of tea. Now there's a real old dragon for you.
Alice groaned as the girls fixed their white caps on and raced down the many flights of stairs to the basement scullery. After washing their faces, Alice turned towards the servants' stairwell.
Good luck,
called Ethel.
See you at breakfast.
Alice opened the green baize door and stepped out onto the black and white tiled floor in the entrance hallway of No. 6. She felt tiny in the large space, standing next to the tall grandfather clock. As she looked up the grand mahogany staircase, the stern words of warning from Mrs. Hardcastle, the housekeeper, rang in her head.
Remember, do not be seen or heard by the family upstairs. You are to be invisible.
A shiver ran down her spine at the thought of running into Lord or Lady Dorsey, the master and mistress of the house. She had not managed to stay invisible to her last employer. She shook the memory out of her mind. It's only just gone 6 o'clock. They won't be up for hours, she thought to herself, before straightening herself up and stepping onto the stairs.
How can anyone be invisible anyway? It's impossible.
She walked up to the 3rd floor, to where Mabel had pointed out the schoolroom door. Once inside, she could barely take in her surroundings before a brown Yorkshire Terrier bounded towards her, yapping furiously.
Nero, be a good boy, it's only me. Ow!
Alice shook her leg free from the small dog nipping her ankle. She darted across the room and clutched a rocking horse for balance, almost tripping as it rocked from side to side. Nero stood in front of her, a defiant look in his eyes, still barking wildly.
Shh, Nero, shh! You'll wake everyone up.
Alice edged around the room, her eyes scanning every surface for the dog's lead.
Will you stop that barking, please? Mrs. Hardcastle told me, do not be seen or heard.
Nero stopped barking, tilting his head in surprise at Alice's perfect impression of Mrs. Hardcastle's shrill, stern voice. Alice breathed a sigh of relief.
Thank you.
Ruff, ruff. The barking restarted, and Alice turned to fling open the cupboard doors, desperate to get the noisy nuisance out of the house. She jumped back and shrieked as a tall, dark-haired boy crawled out of the furniture.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give you a fright,
said the boy, brushing down the trousers of his three-piece suit.
Nero, enough!
Alice watched, open-mouthed, as Nero went berserk with glee, showering the boy with licks.
What are you doing here?
Alice blushed, remembering Mrs. Hardcastle's instruction not to speak to family members unless spoken to. It was only 6 a.m, and she had already failed in her first attempt to be both invisible and unheard.
I always get up early.
Alice did not think that this answered her question, but said no more. The boy softly patted the dog's coat.
I say, you're a terrific mimic. I almost thought Mrs. Hardcastle was in the room.
Alice squirmed.
Nero's a fine old chap, really, although he can be rather naughty with strangers. Here, come and stroke him.
Alice hesitated, not wanting to be nipped again. Nero looked like an entirely different dog with this boy. She slowly walked over to the pair and knelt down, stroking his fur. Nero stopped for a moment, before shuffling himself around and licking her hand. The boy looked up and smiled, his eyes warm.
See, he's your friend now too. I haven't seen you here before. What is your name?
Alice.
She blushed again, racking her brains to remember how she was supposed to address younger members of the gentry.
I'm Theo. Pleasure to meet you.
Alice stepped back slightly, wondering what an appropriate response would be. Mrs. Hardcastle had only instructed her on how to get out of the family's way.
Stand far against the wall and tilt your head down.
She had not prepared her for having an actual conversation with them.
Oh, you must have been looking for this.
Theo stood up and opened a drawer from a cabinet behind him. He turned and handed Nero's lead to Alice.
How old are you?
12.
So am I. When is your birthday?
The 4th of August.
Mine is in March, on the 23rd. So I'm older than you.
Theo reached inside the cupboard for a grey flat cap and placed it on his head.
I shall join you and Nero, if I may. I can show you Hyde Park.
Panic flashed across Alice's eyes.
No, Master Theo. I mean, thank you, but Mrs. Hardcastle told me.
Theo waited for a few moments.
What did she tell you?
Alice swallowed hard.
To be invisible.
Theo tilted his head.
That's impossible, is it not? Although, sometimes I give it a try myself.
I know. Well, actually, I don't know. But I'm not supposed to be talking to you. I only got here yesterday, and I've already broken the rules. I was just meant to be taking Nero for a...
The sound of footsteps outside in the corridor interrupted Alice's thoughts.
Now I'll get into trouble.
Theo backed away to the door.
It's all right. You shan't get into trouble. If you did, I'd just say it was my fault. Everything usually is. But I will go. I hope to speak with you again, Alice.
With a wink, Theo turned and left the room, leaving the new maid of all work wondering what sort of a family lived at No. 6.